They looked me straight in the eyes at the front desk and said there was no room booked for me. My daughter-in-law smiled and said a freeloader who doesn't chip in doesn't deserve to vacation with us. So, I didn't argue. I grabbed my suitcase and walked out. When it finally hit them what that really meant, they couldn't even pay for their own room. I'm Harriet, 65 years old, and the moment I realized my daughter-in-law hadn't booked me a room, I was standing in the drafty lobby of a beach hotel on the East Coast. The woman behind the desk kept tapping at her keyboard. The awkward silence between my family growing thicker by the second. My son Ryan stared down at his shoes like they owed him money. His wife Kendra swirled a glass of champagne and shot me this smug little grin that said she'd been waiting for this. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Caldwell," the clerk said quietly. "But there's no reservation under your name." Kendra stepped forward, smoothed her fancy dress, and announced loud enough for half the lobby to hear. "Someone who doesn't contribute a dime to the family income doesn't get to tag along on our trips." Those words hung in the air like poison, but I didn't feel the urge to cry or yell. I just watched her. She'd planned this moment down to the last detail, wanting to humiliate me right there in front of strangers. Ryan didn't say a single word in my defense. Nothing for the mom who'd handed him the seed. Money for his business 2 years earlier. In that instant, I understood this wasn't some mix-up. It was a test to see how much I'd take. I looked at Ryan, then at Kendra, and felt this strange, crystal-clear calm wash over me. "All right then," I said evenly, gripping my suitcase handle tighter. "I'll be on my way." Kendra's smile faltered for a split second. She'd been counting on tears or begging, not this cool detachment. I turned around without waiting for a reply and walked straight through the sliding glass doors into the salty breeze. The lobby faded behind me, that heavy tension still thick in the air while I already had my phone out. What they thought was my rock bottom turned out to be the moment I started writing the bill before I even left the parking lot. I knew exactly what came next. The 3-hour drive home gave me nothing but the steady rhythm of my own thoughts. No radio, no distractions. Kendra thought she held all the cards because she managed the house and planned the trips, but she'd forgotten one little detail. The house they lived in was still officially mine. I'd let them stay there rent-free to help Ryan's business get off the ground. And on top of that, I'd been sending a hefty check every month for upkeep and the gardener. Back in my apartment, I made myself a cup of tea, sat down at my old oak desk, and let the phone buzz non-stop. Ryan was calling, no doubt pushed by Kendra, who was finally feeling the pinch of my absence. I ignored every ring and opened my banking app instead. First thing, I canceled the automatic transfer for house money, that $2,000 monthly support for their bills and yard work. It had always been voluntary, and after today, generosity was officially off the table. Next, I shut down the shared credit card they were supposed to use only in emergencies. Kendra had mostly been treating it like her personal fund for fancy lunches and home decor. I didn't feel vengeful, just lighter, like I'd finally dropped a load I'd been carrying way too long. I'd tried so hard to be a good mom and mother-in-law, but respect isn't something you can buy. In the kitchen, I quietly put the dishes away, everything in its place. My heart beat steadier than it had been in years. I knew they wouldn't notice the changes for a few days, not until the first bills bounced. Their whole polished life had been built on my silence, and that silence was done. Tomorrow morning, I'd head over to the house, but not for a chat. I tucked my phone in a drawer and went to bed ready for the next move. The next morning, I drove over to the house, my childhood home, really, where Ryan and Kendra had made themselves so comfortable. I let myself in with the key I'd always kept, and stepped into the hallway that smelled like Kendra's expensive perfume and fresh-cut flowers. They were still away on their trip, which gave me the perfect window to draw some very physical lines. I went straight to the little downstairs office I'd reserved for myself when they moved in. Kendra had turned it into a dumping ground for her endless online shopping boxes. I calmly, but firmly, moved every carton and bag out into the hallway until the room was empty again. It wasn't about space. It was about reminding everyone whose house this still was. Once it was cleared out, I swapped the lock on the office door, a simple turn of the wrist that said, "This space was mine again, period." No notes, no explanations, no angry group texts. I grabbed a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge, sat at the big wooden kitchen table for 4 and looked at the photos on the wall, them grinning in pricey vacations I'd often helped fund without anyone saying thank you. Kendra had called me a freeloader while literally living off my retirement and savings. The irony sat thick in the cool air of that big house, which suddenly looked way too expensive for their new reality. I left as quietly as I'd come, carrying a deep satisfying sense of reclaiming what was mine. Back home, the first text from Kendra popped up, and the triumphant tone was gone. "Harriet, why is the credit card declined? We're stuck here and can't pay the hotel bill." A string of exclamation points followed. I read it twice, set the phone down, and started fixing my dinner. The days of bankrolling bad behavior were officially over. 2 days later, I heard Ryan's car pull into my driveway. They'd cut the trip short. I opened the door before they could knock and stood firm in the doorway, not inviting them in. Ryan looked wiped out, hair a mess. Kendra hung back with red-rimmed eyes, trying to hide her fury behind outrage. "Mom, what the hell? We had to borrow money from friends just to get home." Ryan's voice cracked with embarrassment. I looked at him calmly, then at the pricey watch on his wrist and the designer bag Kendra was clutching like a lifeline. "I figured a freeloader shouldn't butt into your finances," I said simply, meeting Kendra's eyes. She opened her mouth to launch into a tirade about how cruel I was, but I raised my hand and cut her off. "The house money stops now. The credit card is gone. And the downstairs office is locked my space again." I laid it out plain and steady. Kendra gasped like I'd slapped her, but I didn't budge. No tears on my end, just the clear fact that the old rules had changed. Ryan tried to smooth things over, mumbling about misunderstandings and vacation stress, but I just shook my head slowly. A misunderstanding is booking the wrong date. What happened in that lobby was a deliberate public takedown. I told them that starting next month, if they wanted to stay in the house, they'd pay full market rent, no family discount. The color drained from Kendra's face as the number sank in. Their lifestyle had been built on quicksand, and I was the tide coming in. "You've got 1 week to decide," I said, then closed the door before Ryan could argue more. Inside, the quiet felt good, peaceful, chosen, quiet. That told me I'd done the right thing. I knew they'd go back to a house where my locked office stood like a quiet reminder of their arrogance. The next few days stayed strangely quiet, and I used that breathing room to straighten out my own life. I met an old friend for coffee and actually talked about my future instead of Ryan's problems. Kendra stopped firing off nasty texts, probably too busy figuring out how to keep the lights on. I heard through the grapevine she'd started selling some of her luxury bags online just to cover basics. It hurt her pride not being able to keep up appearances anymore, but for me, it felt like the necessary reality check her character had been missing. I wasn't being cruel. I was simply giving them the chance to live the independence they'd bragged about so loudly. One afternoon, Ryan showed up alone. He looked smaller somehow, more like the boy he used to be before he started trying so hard to impress Kendra. He sat at my kitchen table and admitted they'd bitten off way more than they could chew, and that Kendra had been the one pushing the hotel stunt. I listened, but I didn't offer comfort. Sympathy without consequences just invites the next round of disrespect. "Ryan, you stood right there and let her insult me," I said quietly while setting a cup of coffee in front of him. He dropped his head, unable to meet my eyes, because he knew his silence had cut just as deep as her words. He asked if we could maybe lower the rent just for a few months until his business steadied. I shook my head and told him, "Trust isn't something you can reprint like money." If they couldn't swing the house, they'd need to find an apartment that actually matched what they earned. That was real life, the one I'd shielded them from for too long, usually at my own expense. When he left, he didn't look angry, just thoughtful, like he was finally seeing the weight of his choices for the first time. I felt the whole dynamic shift for good. I wasn't helpful grandma anymore. I was the rightful owner of my life. That night I slept deeper than I had in years, without their expectations weighing on my shoulders. The weekend approached along with the deadline I'd given them on the rent. I drove over to make things official and found Kendra in the living room surrounded by moving boxes. She didn't look like the polished woman from the hotel lobby anymore. Hair messy, designer clothes swapped for an old pair of pajamas. "We can't afford it," she said flatly, not even looking up as she wrapped a set of expensive crystal glasses. I just nodded. Pity would have been out of place here. She was learning the hardest grown-up lesson of her life. They decided on a small two-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, far from the glamorous life they'd been living. There were no big dramatic goodbyes, no screaming matches, just the dry sound of packing tape on cardboard. Ryan helped quietly, and for the first time in a long while, I saw him actually rolling up his sleeves instead of leaving the work to others. I went into my downstairs office, unlocked the door, and started sorting through the personal papers I'd left there. The house already felt different, less like a stage for Kendra's performances, and more like a place that would soon be mine again. I decided to sell it and find myself a smaller modern place by the lake, where I could really enjoy retirement. Kendra stopped by the office door for a moment, looking unsure, like she wanted to say something, maybe an apology, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't need them anymore. Her actions over the past days had already spoken loud and clear. "Good luck with the move," I said kindly, but distant. That seemed to sting her more than any insult ever could. I'd become unreachable to her, a woman who no longer measured her worth by her family's approval. When the last box left the house, a wave of relief washed over me so strong it felt physical. The show was over, the curtain down, and the actors now had to perform without my budget. 2 weeks later, the house stood empty, and I walked alone through the big echoing rooms that had once been filled with noise and empty promises. I'd already hired a realtor and interest was strong, giving me a financial cushion I never thought I'd have. Ryan and Kendra were settled in their little apartment and word trickled back that they were fighting more often. Without the money and status that had glued them together, they finally had to face each other as they really were. I didn't feel triumphant, just a deep steady peace like a ship finally anchored safe after a storm. My days were spent setting up my new bright loft with water views and plenty of room for my books. Ryan called now and then, usually asking for advice, but I made sure to give only emotional support, no cash. He needed to learn to stand on his own 2 feet as a man instead of letting his mom patch every hole he and Kendra dug. Kendra didn't reach out at all, and I saw that as a gift. The silence was the last scrap of pride she could hold on to. I'd learned that aren't about punishing people. They're about protecting yourself from greed and disrespect. My life felt orderly now, my expenses manageable and my time completely my own. One sunny afternoon, I sat on my new balcony sipping tea and watching sailboats glide across the lake. I thought back to that woman in the hotel lobby who'd almost wanted to sink into the floor from shame, and I smiled at how naive she'd been. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who knew a firm no is a complete sentence and that actions speak louder than any words. I'm 65 and for the first time I feel truly free, untethered from a family that had seen me only as a means to an end. The world is wide open and I plan to explore every inch of it, this time with a reservation made in my own name. Winter rolled in, bringing the first real test of their new life when the heating bills hit. Ryan came by not to beg, but to tell me proudly that he'd taken a second job to pay down their debts faster. I saw a new spark of self-respect in his eyes, something that had almost disappeared during the years of leaning on me. "It's tough, Mom," he said as we took a walk through the woods. "But it feels good to handle it myself." I smiled because that was exactly the healing I'd hoped for him, even if the road was rough. Kendra had changed, too. She was working in a small boutique now and posting simple family meals instead of flashy vacation pics. It was a slow transformation, a forced growing up triggered by losing their artificial status. We spent Christmas together in my new place, everyone bringing a dish instead of me footing the whole bill. No extravagant gifts, but the conversations felt more honest, less about impressing or one-upping each other. Kendra stayed quiet and almost humble in the background while Ryan and I laughed about old times without the old bitterness. I noticed she still looked at me with a touch of caution, like she worried I might pull the plug again anytime. I didn't enjoy that power, but I accepted it as the necessary price for keeping real peace and respect in the family. I'd shown I was willing to walk away, and that turned out to be the strongest card a woman my age could hold. The old dependency was gone, replaced by a fragile but genuine appreciation. We'd never be the perfect family Kendra once tried to stage, and that was perfectly fine. We were just people with flaws, learning to treat each other right without using or humiliating one another. 6 months after the lobby incident, I received a real handwritten letter from Kendra, not a text, but careful lines on plain paper. She wrote that it had taken her a long time to understand why I'd reacted so strongly, and that she was ashamed of how she'd behaved. She admitted she'd taken out her own insecurities and jealousy of my independence on me, trying to make herself feel bigger. I read it several times. I didn't feel smug, just a quiet confirmation of what I'd already known. It was a sign of real growth that she could even put those words down without hiding behind excuses or Ryan. I didn't answer right away. Forgiveness is a process that takes time, not something wrapped up in one letter. But I felt the last bit of tension inside me ease, like that letter had clicked the final puzzle piece into place. I visited them in their modest little apartment, which was cozy and personal now without the fake glamour of before. Kendra made a simple stew, and we sat in the small kitchen talking about ordinary things, no sharp jabs. It was the first time I felt like I was talking to the real Kendra, not the polished character she'd built for social media. Ryan seemed more relaxed, too, no longer under pressure to live up to impossible standards I used to help fund with my money. I realized my tough stand hadn't just saved me, it had probably saved their marriage, too, by stripping away the financial lie. They had to work as a real team now instead of coasting on someone else's efforts, and that had pulled them closer. I left their place feeling good, not because I'd won, but because we'd all learned something deeper. Respect is the foundation of any relationship, and when you break it, you lose the right to the privileges that come with it. The sun was setting over the city as I headed home to my quiet place where I made the rules. Today, I'm standing at the airport again, my old gray suitcase solid in my hand, a little scuffed, but completely reliable. I'm flying solo to Portugal on a trip I picked and paid for myself, no permission needed. Ryan and Kendra dropped me off. They waved goodbye, and Kendra's smile looks sincere this time, no smug grin. They know now I'm not someone you can just push aside when I stop fitting the picture. I've learned that real strength isn't about being loud. It's about keeping control of your own resources and your own boundaries. The house is sold, the money safely invested, and my new place by the lake is a peaceful refuge no one can disturb. I often think back to the woman in that hotel lobby who almost wanted to disappear from shame, and I smile at how naive she was. She doesn't exist anymore. In her place is someone who knows a clear no is a full sentence, and that actions matter more than words. I don't need validation through luxury trips or status symbols anymore. My worth lives inside me, independent of my family. When I land in Portugal, there'll be a room waiting under my name, and I'll take the key with pride. Success for me now is the quiet certainty that I can walk away anytime I want, and that I don't need anyone to assign me a seat at the table. I built my own solid foundation. Steady and unshakable, and I'll spend the rest of my life building on it exactly the way I choose. My story isn't a revenge tale. It's about coming back to myself and discovering my own strength through clear consequences. As the plane lifts off, I look out the window at the shrinking world below and take a deep breath. I'm Harriet. I'm free. And I finally earned my place in the world on my own terms. You don't lose power when you walk away. You lose it when you keep paying to stay where you're not respected.